Hey guys, how you doing? This is Mike McCormick with Advanced Criminology. This will be video number 4, and this is a continuum from the other video number 3 that dealt with the Department of Justice investigation of the Baltimore City Police Department. And this report again was filed August 10th, 2016. I wanted to touch, I mentioned in the last video that there was a whole bunch of stuff that came out with the DOJ investigation that would take me hours upon hours to kind of go through a whole bunch. But I had to go back and kind of give you what the investigation revealed, and then also give you my personal and professional commentary along with it. I certainly appreciate any feedback from those of you who are watching these videos. They're very educational, very informative. I stand behind everything that I produce. I stand behind everything and all the information that I put out there to you, the audience. If there is a mistake, if there are corrections that need to be made, I certainly will come back on another video and do that follow-up in the interest of being fair to the Baltimore Police Department, as well as being fair to you, the viewers. Tonight I want to touch on a couple of things, and we'll start with the DOJ report, page 6. Basically, from 2010 to 2015, the DOJ reported that the supervisors at Baltimore Central Booking and local prosecutor's office rejected over 11,000 charges made by Baltimore police officers because they lacked probable cause or otherwise did not merit prosecution. 11,000. In 5 years, that's 11,000. So that's about 2,200 charges per year that are kicked back, and people are released in many of those instances, and then some charges are just reduced in some of those instances. And all that's done at the central booking. So it was cause for concern that they even reported it. But 11,000 at 2,200 per year is quite a lot. Further on, the report talked about the discrimination against African Americans. Now, there's only 620,000 citizens that reside in the city of Baltimore. Of that 620,000 citizens, approximately 400,000 are African American. So DOJ reported that disproportionately the Baltimore Police Department searches African Americans during stops. BPD searched African Americans more frequently during pedestrian and vehicle stops, even though searches of African Americans, this is very interesting, that the searches of African Americans were less likely, they say, to discover contraband. Indeed, BPD officers found contraband twice as often while searching white individuals compared to African Americans during vehicle stops, and 50% more often during pedestrian stops. There are folks out there who would want to say that racism doesn't exist, structural racism doesn't exist, cultural racism doesn't exist. And those folks are just leading a blind eye to living in this society where those of us who know, and those of us who live and work in the community, we all know, those of us who are educated, we know that structural racism exists and cultural racism exists, and these things permeate our state agencies as well. We're talking about people, and people have cultural biases in all walks of life, and so those things are in fact real. They are real. This points out that there's an issue that the fact that the BPD officers found contraband twice as much with the white pedestrians and the white vehicle searches that they had than African Americans, but yet African Americans account for more of the stops. So that was interesting that they found that out. The other thing was that BPD uses unreasonable force against people who present little or no threat to officers. Specifically, use of force against individuals who are already restrained and under officers' control, and individuals who are fleeing from officers and are not suspected of criminal offenses, serious criminal offenses. That would include Freddie Gray type offenses, pocket knife, simple possession, if you will, of marijuana or some type of narcotic, that wasn't the case in Freddie's case. But those are the types of cases they're talking about because they're not serious criminal offenses. One of the concerns that they had, the Department of Justice had, was that BPD's use of excessive force, it was compounded by their ineffective oversight of its use of force. This was an unbelievable statistic that they gleaned, was that of the 2,818 use of force incidents that were recorded in a nearly 6-year period, the Baltimore Police Department investigated, you won't believe this number, they only investigated 10 incidents out of the 2,800, 10 incidents based on concerns identified through its internal review. Of those 10 cases, which was of that 2,800, BPD only found one use of force to be excessive. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. They talked about the department's deficient policies and training, supervision, and accountability. They indicated that the department also lacks a civilian oversight. Its Civilian Review Board, CRB, is hampered by inadequate resources, and the agency's internal affairs and disciplinary process lacks transparency. Important. Very important. I want to go to another section of the report where this was an audit that was done. Now, the system is set up when officers decide to make stops of individuals. The system is set up that there be a form that be completed every time an individual was stopped in the street. In 2014, the report revealed that the audit of handgun charges, there was an audit of handgun charges in 2014 that arose from stops, found that the officers did not complete a stop form in a single one of the 335 cases. No forms were completed in 335 cases. In short, their investigation suggests that BPD officers, get this number here, because remember, when the Department of Justice came in, they brought professional statisticians from Washington, D.C. and some local firms to help out with the stats. These people will do criminal justice stats all day long, all their life. This is what they do, live and breathe and eat stats. So they just didn't bring in, people who don't know what they're doing when it came to stats and auditing. They brought in top professionals around the country to do this. So, in short, the investigation revealed that, in all likelihood, that in 1 year, Baltimore City accounted for making 700,000 pedestrian stops in a city of only 620,000 residents, of which 400,000 are African American. 700,000 stops. Now, if I just wanted to be, let's just say, if I just wanted to say, okay, if you have 620,000 people, and we're going to include all the races in that are in this city, 620,000, that would mean that everybody got stopped once. That's what that would mean, that everybody got stopped once. But we know disproportionately of those 700,000, trust me, there were many African Americans. Some of the same people were getting stopped over and over again. I just wanted to bring that up. I just thought that was a fantastic point that the statisticians made, that approximately 700,000 people, that's a lot of people. It's a huge amount of people. And so it gets back to, you know, you have to justify things in life that warrant justification. If the crime rate and the gun homicide rate is tied to aggressive law enforcement, because that's what that is. When you stop 700,000 people in 1 year, that's aggressive law enforcement. You would think that the fruits of those stops would bear, the results of those stops would bear fruit. However, we already know that the homicide rate, and I said this in video 3, that the homicide rate is pretty much the same as it was last year and may exceed it by the end of this year. So when you look at the proactive enforcement, if you will, on one hand, does the ends justify the means? In this case here, it did not. Remember, we had a rogue gun squad out there for a couple of years that basically were criminals doing what they wanted to do to citizens out there, robbing, stealing, lying on reports, going to court lying, writing false warrants, affidavits for search and seizure warrants for people's homes. So they were out of control. They were just totally out of control. One other thing that I wanted to bring up was, it has to do with local city ordinances, where in this city here, maybe I can't speak for other cities, but in this city it's kind of unique. This city is unique in the sense that the blocks are very short, very small in length in terms of their length. You have corner stores and bars just about on every corner that there is in the city, or if not in the middle of the block, as well as churches. Again, corner stores and bars. So the city ordinance, local city ordinance that the city police department enforces is pretty much an ordinance that has to do with trespassing and loitering in front of those establishments. I can remember back in the 80s, early 80s, when I started policing, and that particular loitering rule was something that we used in attempt to clear the corners, if you will, because that's the term that's used, clear the corners off, in particular areas where there was a high crimes. And the theory was that a lot of the criminals would mingle on those corners to discuss some of the nefarious things that they were going to do that evening. So the idea was to be able to kind of move those folks along with that city ordinance. Well, I remember when I first started, and that city ordinance had a rule that said there was no loitering within 50 feet of the doorway on the sidewalk. No loitering within 50 feet either direction of a doorway. So here's the door here, right there. And so either direction on that side, 50 feet out, you were in violation. Then as time went on and folks realized that, well, in this city, it's kind of hard to enforce that rule because people live above bars, people live beside bars and stores, and those days where they want to sit out front on their stoops, they can't do it because technically they would be in 50 feet of that bar or that convenience store. So I always thought that was a rule that was crazy anyway, an ordinance that was crazy anyway. But because it actually ruined the quality of life over time in the city, particularly in the oppressed areas of the city where people who live can't invite their friends and family over to sit out on the stoops to chit-chat. You have to, the rule basically says you have to be impeding traffic, the free flow of pedestrian traffic, meaning that if somebody walks down the street and you're standing there, they actually have to walk around you or walk, let's say, walk out in the street. If they walk out in the street and have to come back up on the sidewalk, you would be in violation of that loitering law. I look at cities like New York. I mean, come on. Everybody is walking back and forth walking in the street to around, because the crowds are just that much on city streets. But that was used as the tool for law enforcement, and that still became a mainstream tool to use in law enforcement in the city. That started, like I say, when I started in 1980, and to this day, that particular law enforcement tool has been used to arrest thousands and thousands of people. I mean, thousands of people. When you look at that 11,000 number that I told you earlier, a lot of that was charges that were dropped from people, and the DOJ surmised that that particular law was unconstitutional because it wasn't enforced correctly. And there's more to that particular law. I won't get into that this evening, but there's a lot more to that particular law. So that right there caused a huge issue in the city with people who lived in the community, and officers were just forcing people to move from one doorway to the next bar on the corner to the next bar around the corner. So you basically are chasing people in a circle, right, to move around. So it just didn't work, and it doesn't work if it's not effectively enforced. So I did want to talk about that. So and that's why I kind of brought it up. So I'm leaving this video short tonight. I just want to touch on that part of the investigation, because I thought that some folks would want to know that. The other thing that let's see here. The other thing that I wanted to touch on was the fact that when you talk about homicides, and I'll mention homicides and then I'll be done with the video. I had the opportunity to do some research recently on homicides, and I had the esteemed pleasure of meeting the Houston police chief about 3 months ago. His organization that he's a not nonprofit organization, but his business now. He runs a private business now that does consulting for police departments around the country. And I spoke with the chief. If you recall, the chief at that time, chief of Dallas. I'm sorry. The chief of the Dallas Police Department I met him. He was a very nice guy, and we talked about the incident with the Black Lives Matter protest, and how that protest was peaceful. He admitted that was a peaceful protest. It just took one individual with a high-powered weapon to turn it into something that it was never supposed to be. And he was very remorseful in the fact that he felt real bad about the fact that 5 of his officers were gunned down. And one thing he told me, and this sticks with me, that he said, you know how hard it is to go to 5 families and explain to their wives and children that their father is not coming home when he just left to go on his shift. So, in a sense, I was very, empathetic to his cause, and it just resonated with me that having met him, and I also questioned him on one of his statements that he made on the national news, where he said that that if you think being a Dallas police officer is an easy job, then if you think that it's so easy, then why don't you come and apply for it yourself? And I asked him why did he make that statement. He said he made it in the heat of, he was upset about the officers being killed under his charge, and that he felt like the police department was getting a bad rap because most civilians think the job is easier because they're looking from the outside in. And he knew different, and then I knew different. Because you might say that you can come and apply for a police officer's job, but the fact of the matter is that maybe out of 500 applicants within a year, they're probably only going to select probably about 75 to 80 people to go through an academy class. So, we talked, and it was just interesting to meet him. One of the other things I wanted to bring up is the homicide rate. If you look at Baltimore's homicide rate last year, 2016, this year 2017, they're pretty much on board for the same amount of close to the same amount of homicides. In a city, again, of 620,000 people. That 620 figure I'm certainly getting from the U.S. Department of Census. So that's a real figure. The 620 citizens or population, people of citizens who live in Baltimore, I compared that to the 2.4 million citizens who live in Houston. And I chose Houston because of the recent flood and devastation down there. And I chose Houston because Houston is I believe, has the fourth largest police department in the country. So I looked at the 2.4 million people, but then I looked at the homicide rate. And the homicide rate within 2.4 million people was lower than the homicide rate in Baltimore for both 2016 and probably will be for 2017. So I found that quite interesting, that they have 4 times the population that we have here in Baltimore and have roughly the same amount of homicides that we have. So I guess my suggestion would be to Commissioner Davis to certainly consult with the Police Commissioner of Houston to find out what they are doing to maximize their enforcement efforts to keep the homicide rate low, because that is a low homicide rate for 2.4 million people living in a major city. So my time is up. I thank you for viewing the video. I certainly would want you to subscribe if you can. Certainly if you have any questions or anything like that, you know, we're located online at advancedcriminology.com. It's just that simple. Advanced Criminology, 2 words, Advanced Criminology tied together.com, and just go ahead and forward any questions that you may have. We also have copies of documentation of statistics that we use, where we glean our statistics from. And so I appreciate your time. Thank you.